Welcome back. I'm Dr. Hazel Huang, and in this video, I'm going to answer 8 questions I hear most often from dissertation students when they design their questionnaire. Let's dive in. One of the questions I get asked most is a very practical one. How many response options should you provide? Should you use a 5-point scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree, or a 7-point, 9-point, or even 11-point scale? You do have some flexibility here. 5 and 7 are the most common choices in the literature, and there is a growing trend towards using more points, because more options increase measurement sensitivity and give you a more nuanced picture of how participants actually feel. 2 rules to keep in mind. First, keep the number of categories consistent for any single variable. And second, where possible, use an odd number so participants have the option of a neutral midpoint. A related question I hear often: do you need to match the number of response points used in the studies you are drawing your scales from? The short answer is no, you don't. The one rule you do need to hold firm on, however, is internal consistency. Whichever number of points you choose for a given variable, every item measuring that variable must use the same scale. Mixing a 5-point and a 7-point scale within the same construct will cause problems, but it is perfectly fine to use different numbers of points for different variables across your questionnaire. A very common challenge students face is that some validated scales are long. A single construct might have 12, 15, or even 20 items. Can you shorten them? Yes, and many researchers do exactly this. The key is to do it carefully and with justification. Your first move should always be to search the literature for a validated shortened version, because if one exists, using it is always preferable to creating your own. It has already been tested for reliability and validity. If no shortened version exists and the scale measures multiple subdimensions, you can select the subdimension most directly relevant to your study and use just those items. What you want to avoid is arbitrarily dropping items without psychometric justification. Always make sure you can explain your reasoning. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, you cannot find a suitable existing scale. Can you develop your own? The answer depends on what you are measuring. For behavioral measures, what people do, how often, or what they have purchased, yes, you can generally develop your own items without major issues. Behavioral questions tend to be face-valid and relatively straightforward to construct well. For psychological attributes, attitudes, personality traits, latent constructs, you should try hard to find an existing validated scale first. That said, if you genuinely cannot find one, you can develop your own. Just take extra care. You will need to justify your decision clearly, pilot your items before data collection, and report your reliability statistics meticulously. But what if the opposite problem arises? Not 0 scales, but several. That brings us to the next question. This is one of the most important decisions you will make in your questionnaire design. When you search the literature, you will sometimes find several different scales available for the same variable, and choosing the wrong one can quietly undermine the validity of your findings. Start by going back to your theory. Read through the items in each candidate scale and ask, which one most closely reflects the theoretical construct as I have defined it in my hypothesis or conceptual framework? Scales can share similar names but come from completely different theoretical traditions, so read them carefully, rather than assuming they measure the same thing. Once you have narrowed it down on theoretical grounds, consider how frequently each scale has been cited in high-quality journals. A scale that has been tested, replicated, and built upon many times is usually a safer choice than a newer alternative, and your markers will recognize it. Always note the source and be ready to justify your decision briefly in your methodology chapter. Now, one more practical concern: how long should your questionnaire actually be? This is a practical question every dissertation student needs to get right. This matters more than you might expect, because length directly affects data quality. Without any incentive, most participants will not spend more than 10 minutes completing a questionnaire. Beyond that, response fatigue sets in, participants start rushing, disengaging, or abandoning the survey, and your data quality suffers. So use 10 minutes as your working benchmark. Time yourself completing the questionnaire at a realistic pace, and if you are consistently over that limit, it is time to trim. That 10-minute guideline naturally raises a follow-up question. Should you simply make your questionnaire as short as possible to keep participants happy? Not quite. And this is where a bit of strategic thinking goes a long way. You do want to respect your participants' time, but here is something worth holding in mind. The most difficult dissertation to write is one where none of your hypotheses is supported by your data. If your questionnaire is too minimal, you may find yourself with very few analytical options when results do not go as expected. And remember, data collection takes a long time. Once your collection window closes, there is no going back for additional variables. So if your questionnaire currently takes less than 5 minutes to complete, that is usually a signal that you have room for more. It is worth including some additional measurements while you have the chance, variables you are curious about, or that could provide alternative explanations for your findings. Think of them as a safety net. If your primary hypotheses are not supported, these extra variables will give you something valuable to explore and write about. A question I hear regularly: is translation always necessary? The good news is that you do have an option here. If your participants speak English fluently, you are not required to translate, but there is an important condition. You need to include an English comprehension test within your questionnaire, so that any participant whose proficiency turns out to be insufficient can be identified and excluded from your analysis. This protects the validity of your findings without requiring the full translation process. One way to implement this is to ask participants to select the word most closely related to a target word, where the target word is drawn from vocabulary directly relevant to your questionnaire content. You can see an example of this format on the screen. If you are collecting data in a context where most participants are English proficient, but you cannot be entirely certain, this is a practical and defensible approach that many researchers use. That wraps up our session on frequently asked questions when designing your questionnaire. If you found this helpful, be sure to check out our other videos. Keep questioning, and I'll see you soon.